In my research for this particular project in a landscape, I came across an ancient Chinese imperial painting catalogue from the Song dynasty and its artists like Li Gongli and Gu Xi. And their work was described as shapes of objects appearing and disappearing in vast emptiness, hovering between emptiness and nothingness. And reading this gave me a newfound interest in otherwise dull subject, to me, the landscape paintings. And from the Song dynasty there was the Chinese poet Su Shi, who theorized painting as an expression rather than a representation. He was also considering that the goal of the artist who chooses to depict a landscape is not to give the viewer an idea of realistically mountains that you can wander around in, but rather than you can be part of the inner world of the artist. I think I've misunderstood the landscape paintings due to their figurative nature, and I've seen them merely as documentation rather this expression from the artist, since it also seems that have often been the approach, particularly from a Western view of paintings from 16th century up until now. And the issue with the documentation is that I'm not interested in documenting life, but rather document how it feels to be alive. I think there is an inherent need for us as humans to leave our mark in some way, whether through art or any other expression. And when we are in nature, being part of the landscape, we see that everything is man-made. The fields, everything around us, even the trees, have been grown by mankind, and we have manipulated the landscape to our need. And there's very little real nature in some way. And I think there is a correlation between how I'm making my paintings and how nature is created in some way. I try to make the painting in a way that I'm able to see the painting as the viewer, to deduct my own individuality from the painting. If I use a brush, I will do my absolute best to leave no brush strokes. And I think it's also why water has been such a huge impact on my work. Simply because it has its own will, and it's absolutely out of my hands, and the water does what it wants. It is an act of contingency in the sense that the painting would not exist without me, but the painting has its own will. For this project, I was interested in investigating further the medium of painting and the approach of verisimilitude from the Song dynasty, the idea of something that seemed like a representation, yet still was an expression. And I also wanted to implement the idea of my pocket paintings, which question reality versus the nature of imagination. When I started out making the pocket paintings, the idea was that you were in front of an object that had a flatness rather than a dimension. Despite it was an object of a dimension, it has a flatness, which means when you are seeing the work, you are well aware that you are part of this world and you are part of reality, seeing an object. Where with the landscape paintings, they are more complicated, since the Adagio painting is and has always been considered escapism, both for me when I started the creation of making the Adagio paintings more than a decade ago, to now painting on top of the Adagio painting, simply in order to erase the dimension, create the flatness, as well as playing with the verisimilitude. In this further investigation and process of landscape paintings, I looked back upon the Western world and the approach and history of landscapes. And I saw a couple of landscape and works by both artists like Rubens and Van Eyck. And they did some phenomenal, great sketches of landscapes which are less known. Yet all these sketches were merely a process as a backdrop to the final painting, in which the protagonist would be the people. And my approach to the landscapes is the exact opposite, where the landscapes are, well, in some ways they are a backdrop, but they are not a backdrop to a figurative representation of men, but rather a further exploration to the idea which were considered by artists like Michel Duchamp and John Cage, considering painting as a place and sculpture as space. And when you are entering a gallery to see these paintings of landscapes of mine, you will only see the landscapes, and the protagonist is yourself. This emphasizes on us as a species, our well-being and our mental health. And seeing our landscape, I think that as a tree is part of nature, I think a painting and creating art is part of human nature. My hope for this project is to be able to look at a new horizon, and not just to live in my own landscape, but to be part of the collective landscape in some way.